Valeria Chuba. Courtesy of Valeria Chuba Valeria Chuba, the author of this post, is an intimacy coach who helps clients connect with their partners. In her conversations with male clients, she has noticed three main reactions to women coming forward with harassment and assault allegations. She has observed men being defensive, men in disbelief at the scale of the problem, and men who express difficulty empathizing with victims. She says there are reasons and solutions for all three. As a clinical sexologist, my job is to help my clients make sense of the most sensitive, taboo areas, their sex lives and intimate relationships. Honest sharing is par for the course in my work, and yet my clients' trust never fails to amaze and humble me. Lately, the conversations I've been having with the men in my practice have shifted to reflect the powerful aftermath of the MeToo phenomenon. Many of us are feeling that this time, something has finally shifted in the way we treat victims of sexual harassment and assault. The voices of survivors are gaining power. Finally, they are being heard and believed, and their abusers are facing real consequences. The powerful mix of anger, rage, empowerment, and hope being expressed right now can feel both heady and exhausting. And while the current focus is rightly on the survivors, many of whom are women, men are also having their own private emotional experiences in the wake of MeToo. Many men are feeling confused and overwhelmed, and are genuinely struggling to make sense of this fundamental societal shift and their own role and responsibility in it. Here are the three most powerful emotional responses to MeToo that men have shared with me. 1. Defensiveness. This has been exemplified by reactions like notable men overwhelmed by the implications of MeToo. Many men find themselves shifting into self-protection mode. Behind this defensiveness often lies a complex jumble of emotions: indignation for being painted with the same brush as the bad guys, secret guilt for remembered instances of ignoring a woman's boundaries or consent, for making a sexist joke, or for watching other men harm women and doing nothing to stop them, and deep sexual shame and pain over the fact that society often perceives male sexuality as violent, out of control, or dirty. Plus, there's fear of performance failure, because, after all, men must always have all the answers, and must never appear weak, and an unwelcome sense of powerlessness when it comes to coping with men's own complicated emotional responses. Defensiveness is complex and powerful. In my conversations with men, I invite them to hold space for their own defensiveness and to begin by simply acknowledging it. This is an important first step. The next one is parsing out the various components of defensiveness and the reasons behind them. This work is deep, uncomfortable, and takes a lot of courage. It's also absolutely vital if we hope to change our society for the better. It helps to remember that defensiveness creates a powerful obstacle for men to experience acceptance, trust and connection, not just when it comes to MeToo but in all intimate relationships. Lifting the defensive shield is necessary to allow the truth of another person's experiences to come through, and to begin sharing your own. 2. Disbelief at the enormity and pervasiveness of sexual violence and misconduct. Many men I talk to are genuinely dumbfounded by the recent flood of sexual misconduct allegations. Suddenly, the stories are everywhere, not just in newspapers and magazines, but in men's Twitter and Facebook feeds, shared by women and even men they know personally. Powerful figures who used to be highly respected are being toppled from their pedestals. To many men, this feels totally unexpected. They acutely feel the stark contrast between their own lived experiences and this seemingly alternate reality of women's lives, in which MeToo is not the exception but rather the depressing rule. Men's surprise and incredulity are not surprising. On the one hand, we as a society often question the validity and truth of women's experiences. It's not a coincidence that the trope of the crazy, irrational, nagging woman has permeated every facet of popular culture. If we accept this trope, then women's complaints become much easier to minimize and dismiss. On the other hand, men are often insulated and protected from the truth of women's stories of sexual violence, both by our often complicit society, and to a certain extent, by women themselves. For many women, it's easier to hide the truth than to risk being dismissed, judged, shamed and punished. It's also important to remember that male survivors of sexual harassment and assault often have even less space and permission to process their traumatic experiences than women do. While we disbelieve and dismiss women who come forward as victims, we humiliate and ridicule men who do the same. We question and deny their very masculinity. Is it any wonder that so many male survivors are opting to stay silent, rather than share their stories? One way men can deal with their surprise and disbelief is to just keep listening, without judgment or interruptions, as they themselves would like to be listened to. Open-minded listening is an enormously powerful skill that can help bridge the current trust gap between men and women. Contrary to societal stereotypes, men have a drive for deeply experiencing emotions and for creating emotional safety and connection in their intimate relationships. Many men who find the courage to open up to their own emotional richness find themselves discovering a powerful inner capacity to be the safe, supportive presence that women and all survivors of sexual violence desperately need. 3. Difficulty with empathizing. I hear this from men a lot. They have a hard time connecting with and understanding the experiences of MeToo and, to a larger extent, the lived experiences of all women. A great example of a high-profile man talking candidly about his own struggles with empathy is Marc Maron, who on a recent episode of his WTF podcast talked about the allegations against Louis C.K., a close personal friend. Maron's words paint a heartbreaking yet all too familiar picture. Empathy is an inherent human trait regardless of gender, but trauma and social conditioning can make it harder for us to develop and access it. With our societal emphasis on biological gender differences and on the idea that men and women can't possibly ever understand each other, many of us are having a hard time with empathy and relating. It doesn't help that unlike women, men are discouraged from ever expressing vulnerability. While we condition women to serve the emotional needs of others, we deny many emotional tools that make it possible to forge genuine intimate connections. Men tell me that, since they themselves never had any lived experiences of sexual harassment or assault, they think that trying to empathize with those who do is hopeless. It's true that sharing lived experiences can be a powerful way to engender empathy, but it's not the only way. While many men never become victims of sexual violence, they may know what it's like to feel powerless, frozen, ashamed, and afraid to speak up. These feelings are part of our shared humanity, and connecting to them can be a powerful way to engender compassion. Another way to begin feeling empathy is to become curious about others' experiences, perceptions, and points of view. The more we come to know one another, the easier it gets to connect. It's important to remember that many of those for whom MeToo is all too real may not have the mental or emotional space right now to offer men support. Women no longer wish to minimize and hide their painful experiences. For many, this is the first time they've been allowed to speak their truth and to process their pain and trauma. They have a right to prioritize their own safety and healing, and we as a society also need to prioritize those things. But those of us who are professionally trained, able and willing can and should support men, too. Helping men make sense of MeToo is not about letting them off the hook. It's about acknowledging how society fails us all, in different ways, and resolving to do better. It's about holding compassion for men while also expecting them to step up to their responsibility. We want more from men now than ever before, and what we want is absolutely possible and extremely necessary, but it is also a challenge. Men are being called to embody a completely new kind of courage, the courage to open their minds and hearts, to question the privilege and societal conditioning, and to co-create a more inclusive and fair reality. In the wake of MeToo, we need men now more than ever. And, as surprising as it may seem, men need MeToo as well. Not just as a way to give voices to male survivors, which is absolutely crucial, but also as a way for men to begin reclaiming their own wholeness. Valeria Chuba, Ph.D., M.S., ACS is a board-certified clinical sexologist and a certified intimacy coach with a doctorate in human sexuality. She helps her clients overcome sexual shame, anxiety and trauma, achieve sexual confidence, and connect more intimately with their partners. In addition to her private practice, she is also the creator and host of the Get Sex Smart podcast, which offers expert advice and guidance to men, women, and couples trying to create deeper, more satisfying, and passionate intimate relationships. See also men respond to the MeToo movement with a D-too, and their stories are getting mixed responses.